I had always thought that morning would pass like any other routine health checkup. In fact, I even joked with the nurse while she drew my blood, saying, "This time, I'll probably just get reminded to cut back on coffee and exercise more." I've always been healthy, rarely getting sick, and if I did, it was just a minor cold. My busy work schedule left me little time to pay attention to my body. But lately, prolonged fatigue, a persistent dull pain in my chest, and rapid weight loss prompted me to get checked out. The tests and scans took over an hour. I sat in the waiting room, looking out the window at the gentle sunshine. Life seemed noisy and peaceful, as if nothing had changed. I didn't know that in just a few minutes, my whole world would be turned upside down. The door to the examination room opened, and the nurse motioned for me to come in. The doctor sat behind his desk. In front of him was a thick file containing papers filled with medical readings and images. His eyes were not like usual. There was no trace of his usual gentleness, only a seriousness that made my heart race. He placed the test results on the desk, took a deep breath, and spoke slowly. "We have carefully reviewed the results, the MRI, and the biopsy. I'm very sorry to say, you have an incurable disease." I stared at him, my brain numb. All the sounds around me suddenly disappeared, leaving only the heavy thumping of my heart echoing in my chest. I forced myself to ask, "Doctor, is there some mistake? I've been normal." He shook his head, his voice growing solemn. "The results are completely accurate. This is an advanced stage of the disease, and currently there is no cure. We can only treat it to prolong your life." I felt as though someone had sucked all the air out of the room. My hands trembled, clutching the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. My entire body felt icy cold, despite the air conditioner running. Hundreds of questions flooded my mind at once. Why me? I'm so young. Does this mean all my plans and dreams will come to an end here? The doctor continued to explain the treatment plan, side effects, and cold statistics. But I couldn't hear anything clearly anymore. Each word echoed from a distant place, blurry and heavy. As I stepped out of the room, the test results were clutched tightly in my hand, like a sealed death sentence. Outside, the sun was still shining brightly, and the sound of traffic filled the air. The world had no idea that a part of me had just collapsed. I stood motionless in the hospital hallway for a long time. No one noticed the man staring down at his trembling hands. In that moment, I knew that life would never be the same again. Sitting in the waiting room, I looked at the other patients, each with their own weary expression. Some carried heavy bags of medicine, others wrapped thin blankets around themselves for warmth. I wondered which of them would leave with good news and which would carry the same verdict as me. When the doctor called my name, I entered the examination room with a sense of resignation. He opened my file, studied it carefully, then looked up at me. It was the gaze I had feared, one filled with both compassion and helplessness. But this time, I saw something different, a faint glimmer of light, but light nonetheless. "We've just received information about a new treatment protocol," the doctor began, his voice cautious. "It hasn't been widely adopted yet, and the success rate is less than 5%. But it could be your chance." I froze. 5%. A number so small it was almost laughable when weighed against the pain and risk. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't ready to die. The doctor continued, "The treatment will be extremely rigorous. There will be severe side effects, and we can't make any promises. You need to prepare both mentally and physically." I looked down at the table, silent for a long time. Hundreds of questions echoed in my mind. Is it worth it? Will I suffer more, or will there be a miracle? But then, amidst the dark clouds of doubt, a small thought crept in. If I give up, the chance is 0%. I looked up, met the doctor's eyes, and said, "I want to try." He nodded as if he had been waiting for that answer. "Good, we'll start the preparatory test next week." Leaving the hospital that day, I felt my heart beating faster. Not because of the illness, but because of a new feeling. A small spark of hope was reigniting. Though I knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges, at least I had found a reason to keep going. On the way home, I saw a child selling lottery tickets standing by the sidewalk, his face dirty but still smiling when someone bought a ticket. I suddenly thought, perhaps hope is like that smile, fragile, but enough to warm a heart that seemed frozen. That night, for the first time in months, I wrote a sentence in my long-forgotten notebook. Tomorrow I will keep fighting. On the first day of the new treatment plan, I thought I was ready, but it turned out that nothing could truly prepare me for the storm ahead. The medication slowly dripped into my vein, the cold liquid running down my arm like a river of ice flowing through my veins. At first, it was just a slight numbness, but less than an hour later, my body began to react violently. The nausea hit me so hard that I had to bend over, gasping for breath. Sweat poured off me like rain, my forehead burning hot but my hands ice cold. My head spun, my vision blurred, and then the pain came, a searing pain deep within my bones, as if every cell in my body was being twisted and torn. The days that followed were even worse. Every morning when I woke up, I no longer felt like a whole person. My joints ached as if someone had nailed them shut with invisible nails. My tongue always tasted bitter, like metal, and everything I ate made me nauseous. Some nights I lay curled up in my hospital bed, listening to the drip of the IV, ticking like a clock counting down my life. In the darkness, I thought about ending it. All I had to do was tell the doctor, I can't take it anymore. The pain will stop. But then I saw my mother's face, my younger sister's face, sitting by my bed every day, holding my hand. I remembered the doctor's expression when he gave me the 5% chance, a look that was both stern and hopeful. That faint glimmer of hope, though small, was like a thin thread tying me to life. I told myself, if I give up, the chance will be zero. But if I endured one more day, maybe a miracle would happen. One afternoon, when the pain eased slightly, I looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky a brilliant orange and red. I suddenly realized that even though my body was being tortured to the point of exhaustion, there were still beautiful moments happening outside. And maybe if I lived one more day, I would have the chance to see them. From that day on, I began counting each day I survived as a small victory. Every time the pain came, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, I won't give up. Not today. That night, the hospital was so quiet that I could hear the second hand of the clock on the wall ticking slowly. Darkness enveloped the room, with only the dim yellow light from the hallway shining through the half-open door. On the ceiling, the shadows of the IV lines trembled slightly with each gust of air from the air conditioner. The heart monitor beeped steadily, like a drum beat reminding me that I was still alive. But with each sound, my heart contracted, as if it were struggling to beat. My body was exhausted. My bones and joints felt as if they were being crushed by an invisible weight. My eyes were closed, but my mind was racing. I thought about what the doctor had said. It can't be completely cured. We can only prolong it a little longer. Thinking about that, a vague fear overwhelmed me, swallowing all other thoughts. I began to imagine the day I would leave this world, a day that might come sooner than anyone expected. In that moment, I felt as if I were drifting into a cold, endless void. Then I heard it, a voice, not loud or clear like someone standing next to me, but like a breeze blowing through every corner of the room, gently touching my mind. I am here. Don't be afraid. I opened my eyes wide and looked around. The room was still empty. There was only dim light, the sound of machines, and the cold air from the air conditioner. I wondered if I was dreaming, but the feeling I had just experienced was so real that I could feel warmth spreading through my chest, soothing the dull pain. Tears fell from my eyes, not because of the pain, but because those words had touched a place deep within me, a place I had always tried to hide. I had never believed in God, never thought about praying. My whole life had been based on reason, on things that could be measured, analyzed, and proven. But in that moment, none of that mattered anymore. Those words were like an invisible hand on my shoulder, giving me strange strength. I didn't understand why, but the overwhelming fear from a moment ago suddenly shrank, giving way to a strange sense of peace. I didn't know where he, if there really was a he, would take me, but I began to believe that I was no longer alone on this journey. I lay still, listening. The voice didn't speak again, but its echoes lingered in my heart. and for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without being awakened by intense pain. I didn't know that this was the first moment of a miracle that would change my life. The fever came in the early morning. My body was burning hot, sweat pouring out as if I had just run a marathon. Each breath was labored, my throat was dry and sore, and my eyelids felt heavy. I vaguely heard the nurse come in to check on me, change the IV bag, and adjust the monitor. But it all felt like it was happening in a distant world, far removed from me. Then in the midst of that daze, something strange happened. A beam of light suddenly filled the room. It wasn't the blinding light of the sun, nor the cold fluorescent light of the hospital. It was soft, warm, and full of life. The light didn't come from outside through the window, but seemed to emanate from the center of the room, spreading to every corner, permeating everything, from the simple plastic chair to the worn hospital blanket. I tried to open my eyes wider, but my eyelids were heavy. In the light, I saw a hand. The hand reached out, silently but powerfully. The fingers were long and slender, the skin not too white but radiating a soft light. There was no sound, no explanation, but just by looking at it, I could feel its strength, as if this hand could lift me out of the abyss without any difficulty. I didn't know why I did it, but I raised my hand, even though my body was so weak that every movement felt like draining my last ounce of strength. As my fingertips touched the fingertips of that hand, a warm sensation spread throughout my body. The dull pain in my chest subsided. My irregular heartbeat became more steady. My mind, which had been foggy, gradually cleared. But I didn't want to leave this feeling. For a few seconds, I forgot that I was sick, forgot all the harsh diagnoses. All that remained was an indescribable sense of peace, as if the whole world had fallen silent to let me rest. I looked closer, wanting to see the face of the person who had reached out to me, but the light was so bright that all the features seemed to melt together. I could only see a vague silhouette, but it was full of dignity and love. Then the hand slowly withdrew. The light began to fade, giving way to darkness and the faint glow of the hallway lights. I blinked, trying to confirm whether I had just woken up or was still dreaming. The room returned to normal, with only the sound of the heart monitor beeping and the air conditioner humming steadily. I knew I couldn't explain what had just happened, but deep down I believed it wasn't a hallucination. Just like the words I had heard the night before, the hand and the light carried a message. I am still here. Don't be afraid. That night I fell asleep in the warmth that remained, and for the first time I began to think that if there was someone who truly cared about me, then surely they were very close. I don't know how long I remained in that hazy state. Time seemed to cease to exist, leaving only the slow beating of my heart and my weak breathing. Then suddenly that hand, the hand I had seen in the light, moved closer. It didn't brush past or touch lightly, but placed itself directly on my chest, right where the pain had been smoldering for so long. It was just a light touch, but a warm breeze spread like clear water flowing over parched land. I was used to intense pain, the feeling of my chest being squeezed, each breath feeling like it was being torn in two. But this time, instead of sharp pain, I felt a gentle warmth spreading from the point of contact. The pain subsided so quickly that I was frightened, for it was completely contrary to the laws of illness. The warmth not only soothed my body, but also touched the deepest part of my soul, where I had hidden my exhaustion, despair, and fear of death. In that moment, I no longer felt alone. A vague but very real belief arose that this hand knew me better than anyone else and was intentionally touching exactly where I needed it. I didn't dare say a word, afraid that any sound would break this moment. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor remained, but now each beep sounded like the knock of life returning. Then the hand withdrew. The light gradually faded, like morning mist dissipating as the sun rose. I opened my eyes, this time fully, and found myself still lying in the familiar hospital room. The cold ceiling lights, the strong smell of antiseptic, doctors and nurses bustling around the bed, checking vital signs, adjusting IV lines. A doctor glanced at the monitor, then exclaimed in surprise, "The heart rate is stable again. How could it happen so quickly?" I smiled slightly but said nothing. How could I explain to them what had just happened? They would think I was hallucinating from a high fever or the anesthesia. But I knew, more clearly than any medical test or report, that something supernatural had just occurred. That night I lay still, listening to each steady heartbeat. Not only had my body changed, but deep within, something had been awakened. The despair that had once engulfed my mind was now pushed aside, making way for a strange sense of peace, something no medicine could provide. I didn't know whose hands they were, or why he had chosen me among the millions of sick people out there. But I was certain of one thing. It was not a coincidence, and I sensed that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I sat in the waiting room, my hands unconsciously clenched together. The smell of coffee from the self-service counter mingled with the scent of disinfectant in the air. The sound of doctors' footsteps echoed in the hallway, papers rustled, and somewhere, a printer spit out test results. I was all too familiar with this moment, the feeling of waiting to hear another verdict on my body. How many times had I walked into the clinic and left with a heavy heart, holding a piece of paper covered in cold numbers? My primary doctor, the one who had been with me throughout this journey, walked in. He holds a file, but his face betrays his confusion. Unlike his usual calm demeanor, he opens the file, looks at me for a moment, then looks up, as if searching for the right words. "We really don't understand," he stammers, "but the tumor is gone." I blinked, thinking I had heard wrong. Gone? What does that mean? It means there's no trace of it. The images from today's scans are completely clear. Not just the tumor, but all the blood markers, liver function, and lung function. Everything is normal. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. I looked at the X-ray and the latest CT scan, placed next to the old ones, where the large, dark tumor was still clearly visible. Now that spot was empty, clean as if it had never existed. I heard the doctor mutter, "In medicine, this is impossible." A nurse standing nearby, her eyes wide, smiled softly. It might be a miracle. I didn't know what they were thinking, but in my heart, the answer was clear. The hands and light from that day were not illusions. What I had felt, the warmth soothing every muscle, every blood vessel, had now left undeniable evidence on the results sheet. The doctor handed me a new file, his voice serious but unable to hide his relief. "I'll have you undergo a few more tests to be sure, but if everything matches, then you're completely cured." I walked out of the hospital feeling completely different. The sun was still shining, the wind was still blowing, but everything seemed brighter. Each step felt lighter, as if I had been given back a part of my life that I had lost. In the past, the phrase incurable was like a death sentence. Today, the very place that had pronounced my sentence now gave me a certificate of freedom. Not freedom according to the law, but freedom from fear, from the shadow of illness. That night, sitting alone, I opened the Bible that my friend had given me, but that I had never read. The page opened to this verse, "For I am the Lord who heals you." Exodus 15:26. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. In the days following the test results, I lived in a strange state, both joyful and confused. The relief of knowing I had escaped a deadly disease was like a breath of fresh air, but at the same time, a question kept echoing in my mind. Who healed me? Whose hands were those? I remember that night, when the fever reached its peak and cold sweat soaked the bedsheets. In a half-conscious state, I saw a warm light filling the room. It wasn't the fluorescent light of the hospital, but a gentle, soothing light that was so powerful it made all the pain disappear. Then that hand, warm, firm, and full of power, rested on the most painful spot. And in just a few seconds, the pain seemed to recede like a quiet tide pulling away from the shore. The doctor had no explanation. He simply shook his head. Medically speaking, this is impossible. My family thought I was lucky. They said the new treatment protocol had worked miraculously. But I knew better. The success rate was less than 5%, and I had never seen such a rapid improvement before. I began searching for answers. From my hospital bed, I opened my phone and looked up supernatural experiences of patients. Many stories appeared about people who claimed to have seen angels, light from the sky, or the hand of God. I read each line, both curious and confused. One night, when everyone was asleep, I closed my eyes and tried to recall that moment. My heart raced, but not out of fear. It was a strange feeling, the feeling of being loved unconditionally, protected, and seen deep within my soul. I wondered, if that was God, why would he care about me? I'm not a believer. I don't deserve it. Those questions haunted me day and night. Every time I looked out the hospital window and saw the blue sky, I remembered the light from that day. Every time I placed my hand on my chest and felt my heart beating steadily, I whispered, "Thank you, but I don't know who to thank." The more I searched, the clearer it became. My life could never go back to the way it was. Something, or rather someone, had touched me, and I needed to know who he was. That afternoon, as I sat by the hospital window, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees outside, the door to my room suddenly opened. A familiar face appeared. Huang, a college friend I had lost touch with for many years. He walked in with a warm smile, but his eyes were full of concern as he looked at me. "I heard you were in the hospital. I'm glad you're okay." We exchanged a few words about my condition, but I knew he wanted to say something else. Just as I was about to ask, Huang suddenly became serious. "I have to be honest. When the doctor said you were cured, I knew it wasn't just a medical miracle." I was surprised. "What do you mean?" Huang looked straight into my eyes, speaking slowly. "I believe Jesus touched you." His words stunned me. I had never believed in any religion before. But when he mentioned touched, my heart suddenly began to race. No one but me knew about the hand and the light that day. I asked again, half skeptical, half curious, "Why do you think that?" Huang told me about his faith, about the times he prayed and witnessed God heal others. He spoke of a God who loves people unconditionally, so much so that he was willing to die for them to give them life. I remained silent, his words echoing in my mind. Then Huang continued, "If you want to find the real answer, come to church with me this Sunday. No one will force you to believe, but I believe you will realize that he is the one who saved you." I looked out the window. The afternoon sun had turned the hospital courtyard golden. A strange feeling welled up inside me, both excited and hopeful. For so many days I had searched relentlessly, but I never thought the answer could come from such a simple invitation. I nodded softly. "Okay, I'll go this Sunday." Huang smiled and shook my hand firmly. His eyes were like the light that day, not dazzling, but enough to warm my heart. I knew that a new journey was waiting for me ahead. That Sunday, I entered the church with a mixture of excitement and shyness. The building was small but cozy, with rows of wooden chairs neatly arranged, and somewhere in the air was the scent of wood mixed with the smell of old books. On the wall hung a large crucifix, behind which a white curtain fluttered gently in the breeze. Huang led me to the middle row and whispered, "Just sit still and listen." Soft music began to play, not the familiar melodies I had heard in cafes, but a strange sound, both peaceful and heart-opening. Everyone stood and sang, the lyrics speaking of a loving God who heals the sick and gives hope to the hopeless. When the pastor stepped up to the pulpit, I was still skeptical. But then his words pierced the darkness in my heart. There are times when medicine stops, but God's power never stops. He is the one who created life, and he can restore it, even when everyone says it is impossible. I was startled. Impossible? Those were the words the doctor had said to me on the day of my diagnosis. The pastor continued to talk about Jesus, the one who healed the lame, the blind, and even those who were dying. He spoke of his unconditional love, that he was not only concerned with the sickness of the body, but also with the deeper sickness of the soul, sin and separation from the Creator. I sat there, my hands clenched, remembering the hands and the light in the hospital room that day. Each image appeared clearly, and a question echoed in my heart. Was it really him who touched me that day? When the sermon ended, the pastor said, "If you hear God calling you today, don't close your heart. Let him come in, heal you, and give you eternal life." Those words were not a typical invitation. They were like an answer, the answer I had been seeking since the day I received the news of my illness. The meeting ended, and Huang turned to me and asked, "How do you feel?" I didn't answer right away. I only knew that a door had opened in my heart, and I wanted to walk through it to find out what was on the other side. That day's meeting ended with an hour of prayer. The pastor invited everyone to close their eyes and bow their heads. His warm voice rang out, "If anyone wants to accept Jesus as their Savior, speak to him right now with your heart. He hears you, and he will respond." At first I remained silent. The prayers around me echoed like whispers, yet they were filled with earnestness. I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion that I couldn't describe. Images from my life flashed before my eyes. The day I received the diagnosis, the long nights of pain, the supernatural touch on my hand, the test results no one could explain. Tears began to fall, at first just a few drops, then flowing like a broken dam. I heard myself whisper, then speak more clearly. "Lord, if you are truly the one who saved me, then today I give my life to you. I don't want to live just to exist anymore. I belong to you." As soon as those words left my mouth, a warm sensation enveloped my entire body. My heart was beating strongly, but it was no longer the rhythm of anxiety or pain. It was a new rhythm, full of life, peace, and joy. I no longer felt weighed down by my old illness, nor was I haunted by the future. Instead, I felt as if I had just stepped into a completely new chapter of my life. A Bible verse I had never learned before echoed in my heart. "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come." When I opened my eyes, Huang smiled at me. He didn't ask any questions, just squeezed my shoulder gently, as if he understood that something important had happened. That night when I got home, I opened the window and took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I knew that no matter what happened, I would no longer walk alone. I had given my whole heart and received a new life in return. In the days following that meeting, I began to realize that the change within me was not just a temporary feeling, but something deep and real. Before, every morning when I woke up, I was haunted by negative thoughts. How much longer will I live? Will the illness return today? But now the first thing I do when I open my eyes is smile and whisper, "Thank you, God, for a new day." I began spending my mornings in prayer. At first, my prayers were awkward, like talking to an invisible friend. But as time went on, I felt closer, as if I were speaking to someone who was truly listening and caring. In the evening, I opened the Bible, a book I once thought was only for very religious people, and read each page. Some words made me pause for a long time because they seemed to be speaking directly to me. One of them was, "I will never leave you, nor forsake you." I suddenly realized that this was what I had felt in the hospital. The touch of a hand, the gentle voice, and the strange peace amid the pain. The change within me began to spread outward. My family noticed that I was less irritable and more patient. Before, when someone did something I didn't like, I would easily get angry. Now I am learning to forgive and understand the reasons behind their actions. My friends were also surprised to see that I was no longer immersed in work or meaningless hobbies. Instead, I spent time meeting them and sharing my experiences. Some people listened out of curiosity at first, but then they admitted, "Something about you has changed. You seem lighter and happier." Even the way I look at the future is different. Before, the future was a dark void, but now it's like a long road with light at the end. I don't know how far I'll go, but I know who is guiding me. Every step in this change has not always been easy. There are times when I am challenged, when old thoughts try to pull me back. But every time that happens, I remember the moment I knelt down and gave my heart to God, and I know I can never go back to the way I was. I no longer live just to wait for death. I live to experience, to love, to serve, and to testify about the one who saved me. And that is a change like no other. That day, the church was more crowded than usual. The pews were filled, and the sound of conversation filled the room. I sat near the back, feeling nervous. The pastor invited me to share what God had done in my life. Just a few months earlier, I was lying in a hospital bed, thinking I would never have the chance to speak in front of a crowd again. Yet today, I was about to tell my story to hundreds of people. When my name was called, I stepped up to the pulpit. My heart was racing, not out of nervousness, but from overwhelming emotion. I looked down and saw all those eyes waiting for me. Some smiled encouragingly, Others looked at me with curiosity. I took a deep breath and began. Not long ago, I received devastating news. I had an incurable disease. The doctor told me I only had a short time left to live. I recounted the days of despair, the agonizing pain, and the moment in the hospital when I heard a gentle voice say, "I am here. Do not be afraid." I spoke of the light and the hand that touched me, of the sensation of pain vanishing as if it had never existed. When I mentioned the day the doctor announced that the tumor had completely disappeared, many in the church quietly gasped, and some wiped away tears. I continued to share the most important moment, the day I knelt down in prayer and accepted Jesus as my Savior. I was healed physically, but more importantly, I was healed spiritually. Before, I lived in fear and meaninglessness. Now I live in peace and know the purpose of my life. I looked around the room. The space suddenly grew so quiet that you could hear the sound of breathing. A few people bowed their heads and cried. I felt that God was touching their hearts, just as He had touched mine. When I finished, the pastor invited those who wanted to accept Jesus to come forward for prayer. The band softly began to play the song, "He is Here." At first, no one moved. Then an elderly woman stood up, walked forward, tears streaming down her face. Then a young man. Then a young family. The entire church was immersed in emotion and holiness. I don't know how many people truly opened their hearts to God that day, but I know that my story is not to glorify me, but to glorify the one who saved me. And that is why I am still alive, to testify to His miracle and His love. From the day I left the hospital with a file that read, "Completely cured," I knew I had received a gift that cannot be measured. But the more I live, the more I realize that this gift is not just for me to enjoy more normal years, but to embark on a new journey, a journey to testify about the one who saved me. Every morning when I wake up, I no longer feel the heaviness I once did. Instead, my heart is filled with gratitude. I often open the Bible and read the stories of Jesus healing the blind, the lame, and those with incurable diseases. And I understand that my story is just one of the countless miracles He continues to perform every day. I began sharing my story wherever I could, in small group meetings, at the hospital where I had been treated, and in casual conversations with strangers. Some people listened and remained silent, but others shed tears, asked questions, and then decided to accept Jesus. Each time this happened, I saw clearly that the miracle did not end on the day I was healed, but continued to spread through my testimony. Once I returned to the oncology ward to visit some patients. When I saw their tired eyes still glimmering with hope, I felt like I was looking at myself in the past. I sat beside their beds, held their hands, and shared, "I was once where you are now, hearing the doctors say there was no hope, but God healed me, both in body and in heart." Many listened, and I saw a glimmer in their eyes, not blind faith, but the beginning of hope. I also learned to slow down, to spend time with my family, my community, and those who did not yet know God. Every day I prayed, "Lord, use me today so that someone may know that you love them." Despite skepticism and even ridicule, I remain steadfast. For I know I am not speaking of a theory, but of a truth I have lived, touched, and experienced. Looking back on my journey, I realize I have been given a mission, to be a living witness to the love and power of God. And I have decided to live each day as a declaration. I faced death, but now I live, not for myself, but for the one who saved me. My story is not just a journey of escaping a terminal illness, but proof that miracles still happen, and the one who performs them is still calling each heart to return to Him. If you are in the darkness of fear, pain, or despair today, please remember, there is a hand ready to touch you, heal you, and give you new life. I am a witness to that, and you can be the next witness. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more shares, testimonies, and miracles. Every subscription not only supports us, but also helps spread the message of hope and love from God to more people.